Hey, we're moving into sort of the Greek phase, as the book calls it. And the book, as it has, does a pretty good job of getting the basics down on all of this stuff. Uh, but you know, as always, kind of like to go into the more unusual aspects of things to try to liven up the book a little bit. And so I thought today we would kind of address some of the more unusual and sort of strange practices that the Spartans especially embraced. And so much of popular culture today sort of highlights and mythologizes the Spartans as these sort of, supermen and stuff like that. And, it is absolutely true that, they do embrace democracy fairly early on, but a lot of other Greek states did similar things. Um, and so, we'll talk about that here in a second. But first off, I kind of wanted to get into some of the more general stuff that the Spartans also embrace, in addition to democracy, a form of democracy anyway. Um, and at their height, the state of Sparta was relatively small. It only had about 8,000 citizens at their height, while neighboring Athens was much, much larger with about 60,000 citizens, or well, people living there. Citizen at this time denotes a male that had the ability to vote, and so people that lived in Sparta at their height were about 6,000 people, and or 8,000, sorry, and Athens had about 60,000 people. Um, a large part of the Spartan population, though, was made up of slaves. You know, most of the Spartan citizens, the males, adult males that could vote, relatively led lives of leisure. They did do a lot of training, they did do a lot of exercising to sort of maintain the image of military prowess, at least. But most of the agricultural duties and the day to day maintenance and labor and stuff were done by slaves, and these slaves were called helots. Helots weren't chattel slaves. Their status wasn't passed down to their kids. Uh, and that's kind of the definition of chattel slavery, is the status of the slave passes on to their children. But they weren't at all free. They were tied to the land that their agricultural duties assigned them to, very much like serfs in the medieval period. And so this idea of, this form of slavery will kind of continue to a degree. Um, so in addition to being sort of a serf, an agricultural slave that was tied to that particular land, uh, every fall, the Spartan government, like clockwork, declared war on the Helot population. So their own slave population, the Spartan government would declare war on these people. And the reason that they would do so is so that a young Spartan boy who was coming of age, approaching manhood. This is sort of his rite of passage. Uh, Declaring war on this Helot population allowed a young Spartan boy to go out and murder a Helot without any formal repercussions. Usually, it's technically against the law to murder an enslaved Helot, but when the Spartan government declares war on the Helots, you can go out and kill one if without any formal repercussions. This was a rite of passage. This was their acknowledgement of entering adulthood. Uh, a young Spartan boy would sneak out of their training facility called the Agoge. It's an education and training program that all Spartan males have to attend. You go out, you murder a helot, and then you sneak back in. It's a rite of passage. We go out, graduate high school and get our driver's licenses and stuff like that. That's sort of our modern rite of passage that we are entering adulthood. There's where you go out and you murder somebody. This does have, in a weird way, this does have some purpose though. One is it shows that the training that the Spartan males have undergone has prepared them in stealth and hand-to-hand combat. The purpose was to go out and murder one of these people quietly and then sneak back into the Agoge without being caught. If you got caught, you suffered a severe beating and all kinds of punishment. Uh, so it gave you a chance to practice your formal training, and this, especially in the later years of the Spartan state, this becomes more and more rigid. The second thing that this the second purpose of this, and there's really three. It shows that you're willing to kill for the state. Part of your training is to go out and, sort of a graduation ceremony, I guess, is to murder somebody in secret and then sneak back in. And it shows that you're willing to do that for the state. You're willing to kill somebody for the state. The third thing, and this is really important, especially as we see a decline of the power of the Spartan state, where Spartan actual citizens start declining as the state wears on in coming centuries. There's more and more of a reliance on helot labor. And so they're having to have more and more helots uh, to provide labor for the Spartan state as the number of citizens, the male Spartans that could vote, as their numbers drop over the years. This provides a check for the helot population. Hey, every year we are going to declare war on you and kill a few of you as sort of a graduation ceremony, coming of age rite of passage for our young men. It keeps that population in check, that we are very willing to come out and murder you if you do not behave, even if you do behave. So it sends a clear message to the helot that your lives belong to us, basically. Um, so that's sort of the state of affairs for the helots. Unfortunately, that's their life. They're basically serfs that could be murdered once a year, as sort of a rite of passage. Um, Kind of back to that sort of emergence of a young Spartan, sort of devotion to the state for these guys, these kids, starts at birth. When a child is born, uh, the child is inspected to see if he's healthy enough to live, and if not, an advisor from the state comes out and inspects this child to see if it's healthy enough to live, and if it's not, they are going to be placed at the foot of Mount Taygetus and left there to die of exposure. If you can't contribute to the state, you are not worthy. Uh, Now, not just to beat up on the Spartans, but other Greek societies practice this as well as other, many early human societies practice this, because it does take a lot of calories and a lot of effort to raise somebody, and if they are going to be a drain on the group, then sometimes these people do have to make hard choices, unfortunately. Uh, but the Spartans do that. They practice infanticide on a regular basis. But other Greek societies do similar ideas, similar things. Uh, and then though, if you do make it past Mount Taygetus, uh, the kids would live with their parents until about the age of 7. At the age of 7, they are then sent to the Agoge, and they're that's that training and educational uh, structure. They're trained uh, in athletics and to a degree military knowledge, but they're also trained in regular educational fields, poetry, languages, mathematics, and stuff like that. So this is not simply just a military barracks or anything like that, but it does have a high degree of military aspects and athleticism and trainings in stealth and hand-to-hand combat and stuff like that. Uh, part of the purpose is, like I said, to teach these guys stealth and hand-to-hand combat. One of the sort of underlying teaching methods at the Agoge is that all of these boys are underfed on purpose. There's a sort of a strict kind of austerity that's practiced in a lot of the Greek states, and Sparta especially. But these guys are underfed on purpose at the Agoge. Part of that is that they would be encouraged to steal food for themselves. Teaching stealth. We're teaching these guys how to sneak out at night and then be able to steal food and stuff. And if they were caught, again, they were severely beaten. A coming of age ceremony is murdering a helot, so a beating is not really outside of the norm. At the age of 20, every Spartan male that's past the Agoge enters military service and remains in military service until about the age of 60. At the age of 20 also. So that you enter military service at the age of 20, you also get married at the age of 20. And Spartan women, just like Spartan men, do lots and lots of physical exercise. They're not going to go into combat, but the idea there is to hopefully have lots and lots of strong, healthy babies. If you cannot have a child with your wife, sometimes the state will assign another guy to come and try to have a child with your wife. Everything's for the state in the Spartan ideology. To give you an idea of how much, this is not, outside of the democracy thing and voting, this is not an individual society that values individuals. The state is above everything else. And to kind of give you an example of that, there are only two people in ancient Sparta that were eligible for a tombstone. One is a male that died in combat. Understandably, that male has died, given his life for the state. The other person that qualifies for a tombstone in ancient Sparta is a woman that has died in childbirth. She likewise has given her life for the state in producing young children for the state. So this is not a society that values individuals. This is very much for the state. Everything is for the state. But like I said, though, they do practice a form of democracy. All males, once they turn 30, that have served in the military, that's a requirement. You have to be born in Sparta. You also have to serve in the military. Once you reach the age of 30, you become a full citizen and you gain the right to vote. That's it. Male citizens that are served in the military and have reached the age of 30, that's who could vote. Women, helots, free people, merchants, laborers, things like that were not in the military are not considered citizens and do not have the right to vote. That's not really that far afield from what was practiced in the United States until relatively recently. When the United States starts out, it's white male property owners were the only people that could vote, and then that gradually opens up, and it's a very similar deal here with Sparta. So there is a degree of democracy, and this is a pretty early degree of democracy. We're actually going to go backwards and go back into monarchies and stuff as we move into Europe and other places. So Sparta is they are ahead of their time in terms of democracy, but in other areas, they're a little bit strange. In addition to this, we are going to watch a video this week on some mythology and reality in discussing Sparta, especially at the Battle of Thermopylae. And there's some problems with the history that the Spartans create themselves. So we'll take a look at that as well this week. So check that out. Outside of that, we will see you later.